Just okay.
Hello. I'm John
And I'm Arden
Sleadd with the Clarion Theater Company.
And we're here to tell you all about our lives, our vision, our history, and what we're working on now.
I hope you can put up with it.
So we will start with John's life. I will ask him some questions and bounce off of him. Here we go.
This is not rehearsed, so we might have to delete some things that I say about myself.
That's right. How did you get involved in music?
I liked music a lot when I was a kid, and I ended up starting to play the guitar at age 17. Then I went away to college as a kind of a folk guitarist. Got a music degree. I have majored in jazz studies, of all things.
And you took a course that you were required called the University Choir.
I sang in a choir. I learned how to sing a part and hear the other parts around me. Kind of fell in love with choral music.
And who was the director?
Oh, you want me to reveal that? We met in the University Choir. Arden was the student assistant, and she was conducting, and I was in the bass section. And you're supposed to keep your eyes on the conductor at all times. Put your music down low enough to watch the conductor, and I did.
So that's why he dropped out after we were dating.
I moved on to other things. Yes, I became a Christian after meeting Arden. I'll back up and say that music was important enough for me. I was formerly an art student, and I transferred my major to music. And I felt like music was a focus and a purpose. And I even remember writing in a journal back in college that I will dedicate 2 years of my life to music. We developed our relationship a little bit while we were performing in The Music Man, and that left an impression on me. Later on, I became a public school teacher and wrote a couple of children's musicals and enjoyed directing musicals. And then for many years, we raised our family. I got involved in church music ministry, was a worship leader, converted my family into a band. We were called Homemade Jam. And then I got back involved in musical theater here in Grants Pass. Had a wonderful experience. Enjoyed it so much that I got to feeling like there needs to be more good material for players to perform. God-glorifying material. So as a Christian, there are certain productions that I wouldn't want to spend all the time and effort to be involved in, but if it was something that I would consider as outreach and ministry that was God-glorifying, got very excited about the prospect of writing material for that.
Relics to touch, relics to see, they help you to get out of purgatory.
You were pastoring and teaching.
We were studying the Reformation and particularly Martin Luther's life. In response to that, I wrote a little skit and got a bunch of players together. We called ourselves the Troubadoorables.
Ladies and gentlemen, lend me your ears. Young and old, bashful and bold, many or few, we're talking to you.
We invite you to witness for yourselves the amazing and satirically amusing story of Martin Luther and the Protestant Reformation.
And we put together about a 15-minute performance, musical performance with guitar accompaniment at that time for a Reformation celebration.
Who is the infallible Pope, infallible Pope, infallible Pope? Which one is the infallible Pope? How are we to know? Excommunicate him! Excommunicate you too!
And it was a blast. We built a stage for it, we built backdrops, we got into costumes, and we actually rehearsed for, I don't know, was it a month?
4 weeks. Mm-hmm.
So we threw it together and had our parts down. I'm sitting here recalling that you were a nun in that production, weren't you?
I was.
Big leaves from Adam and Eve.
I really fell in love with script writing. That experience, I think, prompted us to start a theater company. I do have a habit of kind of day after finishing one thing, hot on the next one. Began working on some ideas for The Prodigal Son.
What do you get when sons rebel? I'll tell you folly, living like there is no hell. He should know, burning bridges as they lead is folly, causing everyone to grieve his folly and woe.
And had a lot of fun taking that kernel of story, that parable, and trying to develop backstories for the characters. So we have the conflict between the prodigal son and his father and his older brother. And then we have this fictitious context that I've added to it of the Industrial Revolution or the Industrial Movement and Romanticism also clashing.
As represented by the two brothers.
Yes, each of them, one an engineer, the other an artist, clashing. So the father is patterned after a very famous English engineer. So as I try to portray through the play industrialism, I've used Isambard Kingdom Brunel as
Brunel Prodigal.
Brunel Prodigal, and I've just used Prodigal as the last name, who happened to be, lived in Portsmouth and happened to have, I think, the first assembly line in the world. So they were manufacturing, got together a cast, and we had the blessing of selling out before we opened.
So I learned what it means to be a producer while I produced. And we've been blessed with some other Christians who are involved in the musical theater, have experience in the background, and who have joined with us on the board, who've helped teach me and teach him what's involved in putting together a musical.
We work with some really quality people who have more experience. So when Arden says that she had no experience as a producer, well, I had no experience as an arranger or an orchestrator. I had written and directed some children's musicals, but nothing full length and with adults moving around on stage. A lot of work, but it's been very rewarding.
And God has been very faithful to see us through so many difficulties along the way to put together these shows. We have to give him the glory.
Immediately after that show was done, I started working on
writing another one.
Here I Stand. I went back to my 15-minute skit on Martin Luther and turned that into a full-length musical.
Dr. Martin Luther into history was heard.
Standing on
But we determined to not use the canned music, and so we had a pit orchestra.
the last medieval man, some say, and first in line to lead the way.
And it had 30 songs.
Lord have mercy, Kyrie eleison, show me where your living water flows. I am thirsty.
Our vision is to use these elements I've been talking about of theater, drama, music, and storytelling and combine them into an engaging, audience-pleasing experience. So
Family friendly,
and faith-affirming.
to the glory of God.
We would like to bless people with an experience that inspires them and maybe even transforms them. When you deal with biblical themes, and of course the prodigals it's from the eternal Word of God. It's the Lord's fiction. So if people are engaging in that parable through these art forms, then we'd like to think that they're also going back and reading the original.
Now we're going from one of the smallest theaters in town to the largest theater. And we've made some changes, or John has made a lot of changes in the original. Tell us about that.
My goal in rewriting it was to orchestrate it, to make the music a lot more dynamic, and then to delve into these people, the characters, and bring more life to them. To add depth to the conflict between the two sons. One is named Feral, he's wild like a feral cat. And the other is Lawson, and he's a legalist in some ways. So he believes in the righteousness of the law, a bit self-righteous in his character. Those two boys, prodigals is the last name of the family, they are clashing.
And you've done some more with some of the other added figures which are fictitious or not in the biblical story.
Oh, there's
the
plenty
bad
of
guys.
Oh yeah, every story needs an antagonist villain.
And you've developed those a lot more this time.
I happen to get to play that part in this play.
Yes. And your son gets to play one of the bad guys. So
A legacy for the Sleadd name. Bad guys. I felt like many of the songs they told the story, but they weren't as dynamic as I wanted. After producing it, I'd go back over and I'd listen to the songs and even the phrases. I felt they could be developed more. They could be expanded, made a little bit more natural, like the melody would follow in the breathing, particularly the phrasing. I think some of my phrasing was too musical and not enough dramatic, as if, for example, a long sustained note really represents confidence. And a short gasping breaths would represent terror or stress, and sometimes, or anger, and sometimes the characters would need to be stressed or angry, but I would have long tones that seemed sustained and confident, and it didn't match. So I tried to go back and rework things to match character development. So I think my writing style is developing. I'm still pretty new at this, but it makes a lot more sense to not make people hold out long notes when they need to carry a story and speak lines. I've learned to pack a lot of lyrics into a short amount of time.
So you've added a whole new song.
I've added 2 songs.
Yes.
And actually, yeah,
replaced
maybe.
one.
Yeah.
Replaced one that was in that same scene. One's called the
The Marvelous Machine.
Marvelous Machine.
Okay.
What is the influence that made you?
Well, when I went back again, I mentioned the industrialism versus romanticism, and those were just kind of incidental and in background that really were still mostly in my head that you didn't see developed on stage. So I went back and reworked it so that we have more lines. The characters, they reveal their attachment to these worldviews much more in the revision. And then I wrote songs representing. The Marvelous Machine is really the song that represents industrialism, and Nature Has Her Way is the song that represents naturalism. So I added those 2 songs for really my setting and context.
What about the musical style of the Marvelous Machine? What influenced that style?
I don't know if I can answer that. I've studied the Broadway genre. I've actually decided to watch a DVD of lectures on the history of the Broadway musical, so I wanted to see that kind of music. So in some ways, I'm attempting to write in that popular Broadway genre. Some of my favorite music, I won't mention some of my favorite musicals, but
I was asking you to. That was the idea.
how about I mention some of my favorite composers?
Mary Poppins, Rodgers and Hammerstein, that inspired the Marvelous Machine. The scene where they sing in the bank, correct?
Maybe amalgam of English. I like English music. My Fair Lady is fascinating. Mary Poppins was great. Chitty Chitty Bang Bang was great. I like jazz. This show does not have a lot of jazz, but some of my favorite musicals include jazz music. I slipped a little bit of swing into certain songs here. I like Gilbert and Sullivan. I like the way that they used rapid-fire lyrics, very clever songwriting. So those are some of the influences, and you will definitely see some things like that looks like, or it sounds like Gilbert and Sullivan.
Welcome to Permission is the primary jazz swing, and you've expanded that one considerably.
When you write for theater, you're telling a story, and if it's musical theater, generally there's choreography and dancing, so sometimes you need to rework a piece to make it big, to make it brassy, to make, the end is
Showy, with lots of dancing.
And so a lot of that would include modulations, tempo changes, a chorus that amps up. Comedy increases, I think, the emotional experience. So comic relief is just wonderful. So I've tried to add a good dose of comedic relief to the drama. I've tried to make it more dramatic, so there's more tension between the brothers. You were talking about the bad guys. Yeah, they're kind of goony, and so the antagonists, the bad guys, are a great opportunity for spoofing and comedy. Whereas I didn't feel it was appropriate to turn the prodigal story itself into comedy because it's very serious. Jesus told that to make a point to the Pharisees and his disciples and all the listeners.
Oh, the most poignant moment in the story is the same as the poignant moment in the biblical account when the father comes running to greet his son when he returns home. And there's a song sung by the father that's quite a tearjerker. So, why musical theater?
Arden, I'm glad you asked. Why musical theater? Well, I think I mentioned that I was an art student for a time, so I'm fascinated with the graphic arts. And musical theater combines so many of the artistic elements. So the theatrical arts, drama, and the literary arts of the script that goes with it. It's a great means of musical expression. So dramatic expression, musical expression. You've got your costuming and your set. A little bit of engineering even, because you have to plan on how things are going to get onto the stage and be removed from the stage. Sometimes you'll have special effects, so it's really fun. It's really the arts and engineering combined in storytelling. And I can't think of anything that combines these elements quite as well as community theater. Basically, it takes an army to put on a production.
Why should people get involved in community theater?
It's new for everybody at some point in their life. And when I first auditioned for that play way back in college, I'd never been in a play. I only had memories of freezing and fear in front of an audience. And so you get up in front of a group, and if you like to sing, you get to sing, and you get to sing as a character. It's not you having to sing, you're assuming a character's role, and you're trying to act and think, feel, and sing like they do. And it's really kind of fun to develop a little bit of empathy for a fictitious character. I personally think that rounds out the character of the real person. Might be that you pull a rope to raise or draw a curtain, or that you move something on or off the stage. We feel like community theater has the opportunity to draw people together and to build and bless a community rather than simply tickle their ears. And it's a big responsibility. That's been my attempt, is to make sure that God gets the glory that He deserves. He's the master artist. He's the creator. So everything we can do, any sound we can arrange, any color we can splash on the stage through lighting, it was from His making, came from His hand. So He ultimately deserves all the glory. If you're a composer, or if you're an arranger, or an orchestrator, let us know you're out there, and we might do some collaborating in the future. So that's my prayer, is that if we fill the house, and especially an appreciative audience, that is the blessing for the player, the actor, the singer, the player, is that they feel like they've connected with an audience and they've been a blessing to that audience.